Welcome everyone to Jaden's Jam. I'm your host Jaden Goss, and today we're talking about The Rings of Power, episode 6, Udûn. So this was the battle episode that they've been building up since the beginning of the show. And I have to say, as a sucker for battles, some of my favorite episode of Game of Thrones was Hard Home. And so I'm a sucker for good battles, and I thought this was the best episode of the season so far. Again, I know it's a battle episode, so this is not going to be the norm for this show, but this was just fantastic. Starting off, I actually really liked the plan to destroy the tower and let it fall on all the orcs. They kind of hinted towards something like that last episode, and we got the payoff. And I love the way it happened with Arondir. He shoots the arrow, it hits the rope or metal, whatever, and then you just see the tower come down on top of all the orcs. And I just thought it was a really cool way to open up the episode. And even the opening, we open with Adar leading all these orcs down to attack the tower where he assumes everybody is. Turns out they weren't all there. It was just a distraction. And I don't know, I liked the plan. I liked the way this episode opened, and it just kept going. It just kept going. It just kept hitting you in the face every single time. And then even when Rondir shoots the arrow and he jumps down, I liked his little flourish. He did a little flip and then kicked the brick, and the brick fell, and then you saw that it was attached to a log which flew, or a 2x4 which flew and barricaded the door so it would get have them stuck in there. I don't know. I really like the choreography and the directing of this episode. It was really good. It was really good. And you have to have a good director come in and do an episode like this, because the whole episode is a battle. So you have to keep the audience's attention, and you have to keep the audience's attention, but at the same time, you don't want to drag it on too long, because watching a battle for a battle's sake, I mean, it can be cool, but there's not going to be a lasting feeling or anything. And I feel like they really pulled this off directing wise and writing. And then so we start off the episode with Adar and then the whole tower thing. And then we switch gears to the boats where the Numenorians and Galadriel are at. And we find out that elves, I didn't know this. I didn't know that elves could see a lot further than humans. And I like that little fact. That was just a cool fact for me to learn. And it just establishes how superior the elves are to humans. And another thing that I really liked was the interaction between Isildur and Galadriel, which then led to, you see Elendil come up to talk to Galadriel, and they get on the subject of Isildur's mother and Elendil's wife, because Galadriel comments that Isildur looks like his father, and he's like, "Well, most people say I look like my mom." And then we get the callback to that at the end of the scene, because Galadriel asks Elendil, "Hey, what happened to your wife?" And he goes to this spiel, which I thought it was a little weird writing. He starts describing the sun setting and stuff, and then he just says she drowned and walks away. But you could see the pain on his face, and I thought his acting was really good. I just thought it was a weird writing moment that he went into something completely off topic and then called back to it. I don't know, but it's cool because we get another reference to her later, when at the end of the episode, Isildur and Elendil, they're talking about horses, and he's just basically saying how a horse can be a part of you. Like they learn to trust you, and you learn each other's feelings and stuff. And then Elendil ends it by saying, "Yeah, your mother taught me this. Like I learned this stuff from your mom." And I like the references. Obviously something happened with her. I know we'll probably find out the backstory on this, but I think there's more to it than her just drowning. But I like the through line of talking about Isildur's mom and Elendil's wife. Yeah, I like both. I'm starting to like Isildur more every single episode, and I've liked Elendil since the beginning, and he just gets better every episode too. There was a lot of good strategy coming from the Southlanders. They in preparation for the orcs who are going to come down the mountain now, the ones who survived the uh, falling tower, and you see that they're covering up the tunnels, and then they're putting some wood over those tunnels. And I like I like seeing battle preparations. We don't always see the preparations for a battle. Sometimes we just get thrown into the beginning of a battle. And I liked how we get to see how they prepared. And I thought most of this is pretty good strategy. I mean, I'm not a battle tactician, but it worked for me. And there was actually like a lot of good battle strategy on both sides. From from Adar's perspective, you saw that he sent a lot of the men first, uh, dressed as orcs. And let me talk about that real quick because I had a issue. So I've watched this episode twice. First time wasn't a big deal to me, but after watching it a second time, I don't think they set the men dressed as orcs up enough. Like I noticed one or two of the orcs have a full face helmet and you couldn't see their face. But besides that, I don't think they did a good enough job setting it up. Instead, it was just a reveal, and I didn't really care as much as they wanted me to. So I guess that's more of a nitpick, but either way. But all good strategy all around, because then the men are like sending down. Bronwyn is like sending down burning debris towards the orcs. There was just a lot of good battle strategy this episode. One of the things that I've already seen is a little contentious, people kind of making fun of it, is Theo giving up the key or the sword. I forget what people are calling it, but he gave the sword to Adar because he was threatening his mom. And I think a lot of people are thinking that they would be braver in that moment. And I guess, because the whole thing is, do you sacrifice a loved one for the greater good? And I think most of us would do the same thing Theo did, which is try and save his mom. Because he's about to watch her get her head cut off from the way that the orc had the knife. So I just wanted to say, like, I think most of us would pretty much make that same decision that Theo did. Like, I don't know. I don't blame him for that, basically. Like, that wasn't a problem for me. I thought that was good character development. From the beginning, Theo's had, like, this dark side, and he's obviously going to go to a dark place eventually than he is right now. And this is kind of like, characters make mistakes, and this is, like, some of that foundation for where his character will go later, I'm assuming. She also told him earlier in the episode, before Adar breaks the walls down and comes through the keep, she did say, like, if you don't help with this wound, like, basically I'm gonna die. So it's either help me or or I'll die. And I think he still had that in his head when Adar comes up to him. You know, just wanted to say that too. But this episode was also filled with tension, like throughout. Like I thought it was. This is the also the best paced episode. I think. We're missing Elrond and Durin and the Harfoots. They're not in this episode at all. but I think it worked a lot better because this episode was so focused on the battle, and I think that's why it's so good because they didn't have to worry about other storylines to shoehorn in and ruin the tempo of the battle. You know what I mean? I think this episode was really well paced, unlike previous episodes. Another really cool, like, little story element that I liked was we see Arondir talking to Bronwyn, and he gives her some seeds, and basically the elves will plant seeds before they go into a battle for, to have, I think, to birth new life, even if there's death, basically. And we see Adar do the same thing at the beginning of the episode. And I just like that through line with the elvish culture. Like, it just, I don't know, it's cool world building, even though it's a tiny thing, but I love the way it works. And I thought it was really cool. And throughout this whole battle that we're seeing, I love that Arondir, they're making him such a skilled warrior since the beginning of the show. And we see that even more so here. I like that we get to see him fight hand to hand in this episode, especially against the big orc, which I think was the best one on one fight in this episode. And, but seeing him, like, use his feet a lot and punch and kick, like, it shows that elves are not just good archers, they're not just good with swords, like, they're good with their hands and feet too. And I don't know, I really liked the choreography throughout this episode of all the fighting, especially between Arondir and the big orc. I don't know what else to call him. But and he was terrifying. By the way, the eye stuff was freaky for me because I'm not a huge fan of eye violence. Like, it's like eye violence and nail pulling. Like, there's certain things, like, I can handle a lot of gore, but for some reason eye violence and, like, nail pulling really fuck with me. And so, but it was an orc, so I think I was able to look past it, but it was just gross seeing all the blood drip down. It actually looked like practical blood. I don't know if it was like the stuff that was dripping on Arondir's face, at least. But anyways, I like that whole fight. By the way, can I just say, I say this every episode, every review, but technically speaking, especially this episode, the orcs, the makeup department, the sound design, the score, like, every technical aspect of this show just fires on all cylinders. One thing I will say about this is I totally thought Bronwyn was dead. Like, I totally thought that she was going to die when she got shot with the arrows. I was like, "Oh, she's dead." And then nope, she's not. She got back up, and well, she didn't get back up. I mean, she was also bleeding out a ton. Like, she was bleeding a lot, and she somehow lived and then was walking around like nothing phased her at the end of the episode. Kind of took me out a little bit, but again, some of this stuff is just nitpicks. Like, it's not like huge deals, but I totally thought she was dead. Another thing I want to say about the orcs is they have way better aim than stormtroopers. That's the one thing about, like, Star Wars is stormtroopers have terrible aim. And I hate that. It takes me out so much, but it's refreshing to see the infantry villains, the minor villains, actually killing characters. Even if a lot of them were no name peasants, basically, in this episode, it was still nice to see, like, there were real stakes. And honestly, I don't know. For me, I don't know who's going to live and who's going to die because I haven't read Tolkien's work. I've only seen the movies and played the video games. So, like, for me, I could have seen anybody dying, especially during a battle. It's high stakes, and I just like the fact that they were able to make that work so well by actually killing characters, even if they're minor characters. It's just there was a lot of death in this episode, and I think that's what made this battle feel so heavy and have so high stakes to it because you're actually killing. So yeah, it was just it's a little thing, but you change one aspect. I'm used to watching like battles and like action movies and action scenes where the minor characters, the orcs, if you will, don't actually kill anyone. They suck and they're just there for cannon fodder. So it's nice to see the cannon fodder actually get some kills. Also, another thing, when the Numenorians come down and they're with the horses, I would just want to say the horse work, fantastic. Like, I don't know how hard it is to get a horse to do what you want, but I just the choreo. I know I've said it, but the choreography was just top notch in this episode, especially with the horses and one thing I will say about this show that kind of grates on my nerves a little bit is the use of slow motion effects during action scenes. They do it constantly on this show, and they did it a lot, especially with the when the cavalry comes and it's a slow motion shot of just a bunch of horses galloping. And I don't know, it just takes me out seeing just all the countless slow motion action shots. Like, we don't need everything to be in. We don't need all these slow motion shots to get the effect of the action. I just feel like they overuse it for this show, and I really felt it this episode. Again, another nitpick, really, when it comes down to it, but it was a little issue for me. One thing I do want to say, and I haven't really touched on him, is Adar. He has turned out to be a great villain. He's got this ruthless hatred. You know, he will take out anyone to get what he wants if he has to. And this episode was really brutal, especially with all the killing from the orcs, killing a lot of the peasants and stuff. Like, this episode was super brutal, and Adar just exudes brutality, and I think he's actually turned out to be a great villain because if you look at it from his perspective, from the way they've told it, he really does seem to treat the orcs like his children, and he really does seem to want to give them a home. You know, we have a great scene with him and Galadriel after he's been captured. And honestly, Galadriel comes off like a genocidal maniac. You know, it's interesting to see the orcs from a different perspective because in all the other stuff we've seen them in, they've always been just straight up evil, and of course they are bad. They do ruthlessly kill humans and elves and whatever they can get their hands on. But it is nice to see from another perspective, like, they do just want to exist. I mean, yes, they are serving Sauron, but not right now. Right now, they're serving Adar, and he's just trying to give them a home. I still don't know what his motives are with Sauron. If he's to be believed, then he killed Sauron and whatever. I don't know if I believe that. I don't think he actually did kill Sauron. I think that's just something he said. But I don't know. It's cool to see the writing is pretty strong with the villains here and making them more layered. And I think they've done a great job with Adar so far as a villain. And another thing about Adar, you know, another great trait is the fact that he is very smart and he does pull the wool out from under the rug out from under the heroes in this episode by switching out um the key or whatever, the sword, uh the hilt. He pulls the rug out from under these people without them even knowing, and I didn't even catch it the first time, but the second time it's pretty genius how the writers were able to do it a little bit more subtly. Unless I'm just a moron. Maybe I'm just a moron. I didn't catch it the first time, but the second time I did. But it's cool showing that he's a great tactician. He's very smart, and he was able to um, basically complete his mission, even though he lost this battle. And I just like that. I like the turn. I hate Waldrick. I like this dude is annoying as fuck, and he basically just fucked everyone over by causing the Mount Doom to erupt or whatever. Like, Adar is a really cool villain. Another thing that I noticed several times in this throughout this battle, when the Numenorians came, was Galadriel dodging arrows by like sliding on the side of the horse. They did that like 3 or 4 times. They overdid it, and I was like, "We get it." She like again another nitpick, but again, now it was just something that kind of annoyed me, like because they did it several times, and it's like, okay, we get it, but it didn't make sense, and it doesn't work. I think as well as they were hoping it would, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, it was cool, but I immediately got taken out by it, and I was like, okay, this is kind of stupid. This is kind of stupid. I will say this is the one thing about this battle is it's very similar to Helm's Deep from Two Towers. And as much as I really enjoyed this battle, that was kind of like, okay, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to do the Helm's Deep, but in a different way. It was still super similar to it. Another weird thing was Isil was sweeping, but they kept him back instead of putting him on the front line. I didn't get why he was held back. I would assume that they would have put him, you know, with the rest of the army near the front. Like, I thought that was a weird choice that he would be held back with the queen and stuff. One of the things that I loved about this battle, this episode, was when Arondir sees Galadriel for the first time, and you can just see like how legendary she is to the other elves, to elvish warriors, and I love the interaction because it's the first time we're seeing him interact with another elf since the elves that died earlier in the season, and it was just cool. Again, more culture stuff with the elves, like I love it, and that was one of my favorite moments of the episode was just him being awe-inspired by this character, and I thought it worked really well. All right, so the whole sequence where Adar is running away, by the way, not actually has the hilt, he just has the wrapped up hammer, or was it a hammer or axe? Maybe an axe, whatever. He's running away with it wrapped up, and when when Halbrand catches him and hits the horse in the legs to make it fall forward, that looked absolutely brutal, and it was it was really well done, and it honestly made me cringe a little bit. Like, I felt bad for the horse. It reminded me of the attorney in the opening episode of House of the Dragon. It really reminded me of that, and we get to see in this interaction, Halbrand has this really dark side to him, and I kind of have a theory about him. So, he's got the pouch of a king or whatever. I don't think that's actually his. Like, I think he killed a king possibly and took it. He's been seen as a thief and a pickpocket, and he's really persuasive, and he is a really good warrior and a good smith. A lot of people say he's Sauron in hiding. I guess we'll find out, but there's definitely something more to him, and I loved his interaction with Adar. He's got him on the ground with the spear. I've heard other people talk about how if he was Sauron, he probably would have killed Adar right then and there to hide his secret. But instead, you know, Galadriel stops him and he actually relents. But I just love, like, it was really great acting from both Adar and Halbrand. Sorry, I'm saying their character names. Uh, by the way, Joseph Mowley, I don't know how to say his name, Molly, who played Benjen Stark on Game of Thrones, and he plays Adar. He's so fucking good acting wise. Like he's great, and I just love the fact that it's basically like a Thanos moment when Scarlet Witch confronts him. It's similar to that. It's like Halbrand's like, "Do you remember what you did to me?" And there's a lot here, and I want to know what happened. Later Galadriel's talking to Halbrand. She's like, "Forget about it. Like, leave it in the past." But as an audience, I'm like, "No, I think we need to know what happened because I think there's a turn coming here with him." Like, but I just love the that whole scene and Galadriel coming in and convincing him not to. We even get that's another thing I liked about this episode, writing wise, was Galadriel saved Halbrand from killing him, stopped Halbrand from killing Adar, and then Halbrand does the same thing for Galadriel when she's interrogating him later in the episode. I like that. It's a nice back and forth. I like through lines, and there was a lot of through lines in this episode, and this episode's really good, guys. Like I dive deep into this. And one thing I did figure out for the first time, between all of the fancy words and the big words that they use when they're talking to each other, the dialogue is a little heavy handed sometimes, but I figured it out. So Sauron was trying to create the Rings of Power, and Adar stopped him because he was just causing the deaths, killing a bunch of orcs. And Adar got tired of it. He said he killed him. I don't know if I believe that, but I figured out. So he was trying to create the Rings of Power. He didn't do it. And so that's what I'm waiting for. There's been no actual ring creating. There's been a lot of talking about. There hasn't even been a lot of talking about creating the rings. But this show's called The Rings of Power. We've yet to see the rings. So that's interesting. I noticed that. I really noticed that after watching this episode and after picking that out. Like, oh, okay, so he's talking about Sauron basically trying to create the Rings of Power. But yeah, also another thing I really liked about Adar and Galadriel this episode was the fact that Adar actually made a good point. Good villains can still make good points even though they're villains. He points out to Galadriel, like, you're just as dark as the people you're trying to kill. Like, she came off very genocidal, like I said earlier, and it really came through in their conversation. I really liked the dialogue, even though, again, a lot of it was a little heavy handed and a lot of exposition. Needed exposition, but just a lot of exposition. But I really like the fact that Galadriel is not your goody two shoes. She is pretty dark and has a definite, like, darker edge to her than just a straight up good guy that you'd see in a lot of other fantasy shows. So I don't know. I like Galadriel's characterization so far. I just think that the actress might be a little one note a lot of the time, but I think that's just from direction and the writing for Galadriel, not necessarily her fault, because I think she's actually a really good actress. And another really good thing about their conversation was at the end of it, after Halbrand stopped her from killing Adar looks down at the wrapped up axe. It's not the hilt. It's just a nice subtle acting of him, like getting a little bit of a smirk on his face. I don't know. I just wanted to point out like some really good acting in that scene from him. Just I like subtle facial acting, and it was really there. Like he looked for a second and he smiled like, "Huh, I got you. You think that's the hilt? It's not." Also, it might be a dumb thing, but why didn't they check? Just unwrap it. I know it's like similar to the Rings of Power where it kind of can have power over you, but you should have checked, right? You should have checked. And also another thing, since we're on the wrapped up thing, why did Arondir really trust Theo? And that was a bad call to give him, even though it wasn't really the hilt, it was the axe. But come on, man. he's addicted to this thing. He cuts himself on it. He really he's really attached to this thing. It was a bad call to hand it over to him, because if that was the hilt, he definitely wouldn't have given it to the Numenorians to dump overboard their ship in the water. Like, no, he would have held on to it. It's quite obvious. So I thought that was a weird moment, even though Arondir's my favorite character on this show, and I really enjoy his character a lot. But I thought that was kind of like a dumb move on his part. And yeah, so basically, was I right about my guess? I basically said that there might have be a volcanic eruption, like with the rising of Mount Doom when they put the key in. I guess I was kind of right. Oh well. It was so cool though. Visually, this episode ended on such a great note. Seeing Galadriel standing in front of all of the smoke and fire coming towards her. It was a great hero moment. Yes, it's super cheesy, and all that ash is going to definitely hurt her eyes. It has to, right? Even though she's an elf, come on, it's got to fuck with her a little bit. But it was a cool action. It was a cool hero moment, and I really liked it. So yeah, overall, I loved this episode. I think this is my favorite episode of the show so far. Uh, I'm kind of worried about the next two, though. You know, this was the big battle. This is what these two storylines have been building towards so far. Like half of the show has been building towards this battle. So I'm a little worried about the pacing for the next two episodes, because this show has had overall a lot of rough pacing. Like, been a little dragging stuff out a lot. So I'm a little worried about the next two episodes, but this was a fantastic one. And it was a great battle with a lot of really cool moments. I love Arondir. Elendil's a great character. I'm starting to really like Isildur. Theo's a little annoying. I'm a little mixed on him. I started to like him a lot, but I'm a little mixed on him. Yeah, so even though Adar lost the battle, he got his mission completed. And I think some of the greatest parts of a story are when the villain wins initially and the heroes have to come back and fight an even harder battle. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next. And I'm wondering how Elrond and Durin get pulled into this storyline. You know, I guess Galadriel's in Middle Earth now. Maybe she'll head to where the elves are. Or actually, no. They said that she's gonna chase down the rest of the orcs to kill them. You know, because she's got this whole genocidal thing going on about her. Even though they are mostly evil, but it's like, you know, it's a little crazy. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. This is a long review, but I really wanted to delve into it. I really liked this episode. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, let me know what you think about this show. Share this video, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're still growing. I'll see you next week for another Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power episode review.